2007, Jacques Brieux published a review of two recent publications of the cosmic movement in the Mercure de France. In this review, he speaks about Aya Aziz, mentioned that he's also known as Max Theon, and he mentions him, he refers to him as a Jew from the Levant. He says there more or less that Mr. Aya Aziz was assigned by an occult Oriental society to reveal to the world the teaching of the oral tradition lost to the Western world, the Kabbalah in its primitive purity, that is, cleansed from its error and childish accounts of profane origins that are contained in the Zohar, and to finally restore it to its integral and true original sense. Since this review, the prevailing notion by followers in the general public and also of scholars is that Max Theon was a Kabbalist and that Kabbalah is one of the central sources of the cosmic philosophy. Kabbalah is the reason for my initial interest in Theon and the cosmic movement. As I'm interested in modern forms and adaptations of Kabbalah, the investigation of Kabbalah in the cosmic movement was one of the original aims of my research and the ISF-funded research project. Now, scholars have already written about Kabbalah and the cosmic movement. Christian Chanel, in his PhD thesis, a lot of discussions about Kabbalah, and Peter Hies, in his The Kabbalah, the Philosophie Cosmique, and the Integral Yoga, a study in cross-cultural influence, which was published in 2011. Now, when I was suggesting this topic to the workshop, to myself first, and then to you, I assumed that I will be able to add to these important discussions. I hope to find more material on Kabbalah in the unpublished materials I received, and maybe to be able to shed more light from my perspective as a Kabbalah scholar and on the basis of my acquaintance with modern forms of Jewish Kabbalah and esoteric Kabbalah. As you will soon see, I found very little additional material than those discussed by Christian and Peter, and I'm not sure if my perspective as a Kabbalah scholar will add much, but you will have to decide. Nonetheless, first of all, because it was maybe a little bit too late to change the topic of my lecture, and because I still think that the question of Kabbalah is central, so central to my interest in the cosmic movement and to the research of the cosmic movement, that it is worthwhile to take the opportunity and have another look on the sources that most of them were already discussed, and also discuss with you the question of Kabbalah and cosmic philosophy. And because of that also I thought that maybe from time to time I will stop for comments, but please the comments only on the things that I spoke about, because then later I'll add some other aspects. Okay, so we'll try, and maybe from time to time I'll stop, especially, and if you have some strong urge, you can so this is a small, it is a workshop, so you can stop me and with comments. So what I will do, I will look at the place of Kabbalah in the cosmic philosophy. I will concentrate mostly on the writing of the founders, the Theons, and look, and maybe, depends also on the time, look a little into the later developments in the writing of Loï and Pascal Thémanis. But first, I would like, before turning to the Theonic writing, I would like to mention the interest in Kabbalah, that was interest in Kabbalah, also, maybe even more, in the writing of other figures related to the early history of the cosmic movement, at least more explicit discussions of Kabbalah. Already in the HV of L, there's some interest in Kabbalah. In 1886, there's an article on Kabbalah was published in the Occult magazine, probably written by Thomas Dalton, T.H. Bougon, where he brings a discussion of Kabbalah, which is mostly based on Christian Ginsburg's book on Kabbalah, which was one of the most important available sources on Kabbalah in English at the time. Christian Ginsburg was a scholar, was of Jewish origin, converted to Christianity, and he wrote, his work on Kabbalah was mostly based on the scholarship, Jewish scholarship of Kabbalah of the time, written mostly in German. There's also discussion of Kabbalah also in another of Bourgogne articles, the Kabbalah, that was published in the Platonist in 1887, as well as in the Light of Egypt. And in the Light of Egypt, shown here, you see he writes, the Kabbalah of the early Jewish rabbis contains long and elaborate treatises upon the various emanations of the 10 Sephirot, which for the most part are written in such an allegorical style to be practically useless to most Western students, and even to Oriental minds are unsatisfactory and in many respects misleading. So as we see here, I will show my sword, okay, just a moment. As you see here, we have...
Who's adding that?
This is Bourgogne.
You know Hebrew?
He didn't know Hebrew.
So what does he know about Kabbalah?
Well, I don't justify his position here.
How can I say people don't understand? Yeah. He doesn't understand the basics even there.
Yeah, okay, and I don't know, well, maybe I, with my Oriental mind, it's hard for me to understand. What you see is very typical, so he uses the sources of the time, and this is a very typical Western esoteric, ambivalent stance, important, but nonetheless distorted knowledge. Also in the early cosmic movement, some interest in Kabbalah. Francois Charles Barlet, whom we know more than we knew before, after Pat's lecture yesterday, the first editor of the Revue Cosmique, he published an article on Kabbalah in the first volume of the Revue Cosmique in 1901, De la Kabbale, mostly, or almost all, I think, the article are extracts from an article on Kabbalah by Saint-Yves d'Olvider, which was taken from Papus La Initiation. There's a few more mentions in Kabbalah in articles not written by the Theons in the Kabbalah in the Revue Cosmique, but I don't think they add much to the picture. What we see, some interest in Kabbalah amongst the non-Jewish members of the HBFL and the early cosmic movement, using the available sources of the time on Kabbalah, not in Hebrew, and I think, you know, this approach, again, this ambivalent approach of interest, but also some kind of a disparagement of Jewish Kabbalah, at least, or the later forms of Kabbalah. But I would like to move now to the theonic writings. Most of the theonic writing, what I call the theonic writing, because I want to emphasize that probably most of them were written by Theona in cooperation with Theona. There's certain types that I think the main types of the writing are the visionary writings and the more theoretical writings. They were published since 1899, although part of them, or possibly most of them, were written before, in the last decade of the 19th century. They were first published in the Journal du Magnétisme, and later in the Revue Cosmique and in the Tradition Cosmique. There were also a few separate pamphlets that they published, and later more publications from the original manuscripts by the Argaman. So that's what we have in print by the Theons. Most of them were probably written, or surely were written, most or all of them in English, but published in French, in a French translation. We have only a few of the original English, again published by Argaman. Also, there are photocopies and transcriptions of the more photocopies and transcriptions of the original English manuscripts, which are in private hand, or at least the photocopies of them. And again, I would like to thank Eva for the transcription of many of the texts and for giving me access to them. First, I would like to deal and look only on the explicit and unequivocal reference to Kabbalah. Kabbalistic, the words, terms, Kabbalistic terms, Kabbalistic sources, that there's no doubt that they mention that they relate to Kabbalah. Later, I will look at other possible parallels and resemblance between Kabbalah and cosmic philosophy. I will start with the term Kabbalah itself. It's mentioned very few times in the Theonic writing. Already in one of the first publications, La Restitution de l'Homme Psychique, published in the Journal of the Magnetism in 1899. There, as you see, I won't read the text, but there's a mention of Kabbalah, or more,
Kabula.
or more. See that?
Where the red light is.
Okay,
In the
so
point.
that Kabbalah, or actually Kabbalah, and I speak a little bit about it, of the
I
Hebrews.
just want to say it's funny, it must have been Charedim, Kabbalah.
Okay, so you're okay. So that's okay.
אבל זה
The on,
קבולה.
the ons again. Well, many times we state the on, but probably, and I think also it was mentioned yesterday. There's an indication that it might have been written those texts by Theona. This they bring the Kabbalah or Kabbalah of the as an example of the lost tradition of the past. And also speak about the futility of searching for ancient sources of knowledge. This is the context. Kabbalah is presented here as authentic and valuable knowledge, yet completely esoteric, closed knowledge. It cannot be popularized and revealed, and it is compared to the mystical eternal lamps that burnt in ancient tombs, but were extinguished when brought in contact with air. Interestingly, he mentions not only Hebrew Kabbalah, but also other Oriental Kabbalahs, the Kabbalahs de l'Orient. Okay? And this is again a very prevalent Western esoteric concept, especially in Blavatsky, but others and the Theosophical Society, that there are 7 different types of Kabbalah. Interesting, as Aryeh noticed immediately, is the spelling of Kabbalah, Kabbalah. There's a lot of spelling of Kabbalah, with a C, with a Q, with a K, but Kabbalah is original, possibly just a typo. Nonetheless, it's twice, and as I also thought, possibly we have here a reflection, East European pronunciation of Kabbalah will be something like Kabbalah.
And I don't think in Yiddish we don't say Kabbalah.
You won't say Kabbalah? Kabbalah?
Kabole.
Kabbalah.
Maybe.
Kabbalah is not in Yiddish. It's not
Kabbalah. Okay,
misunderstood.
maybe a typo.
But in
Anyway,
French
I
you read
thought
it
also of this as-
Kabula. In real French you read it Kabula, not Kabula.
Okay, so, okay. Okay, that, okay. Okay, we'll have to interrogate some
Yiddish
speakers and see if we find someone pronounces Kabbalah. But maybe it's typo. Okay, Kabbalah or Kabbalah is mentioned, not Kabbalah. Kabbalah this time in another one of the early publications of the Theons, Le Doctrine Spirit, le Ouvre d'Allan Kardec, a very important pamphlet. By the way, I don't have the original, but it was printed in Pascal's Max Theon. If anyone has the original and can send me, you have the original.
It's online.
It's online, the original?
Oh, no, original. It's a,
No.
a scan.
The scan of the, okay, great.
The French in French?
In the French, that's what, I missed it. Why did it
I
sound
think
okay?
1955.
You sure of this one?
Yes.
Okay, right. So okay, sorry, I'm going to download it. Okay, so now Kabbalah is mentioned here, this time written with a C, and again in the context of the lost ancient tradition. They speak, or Theon speaks here, Theons of the authentic Kabbalah that was disfigured or lost. Okay, and interestingly, the topics of Kabbalah, the origin of man and the lesson formation. But again, we have authentic Kabbalah, but disfigured or lost. There's also related ideas, although not necessarily identified with Kabbalah. They speak here about the oral transmissions of Chaldean, Egyptian, and Hebraic tradition. Again, describing them as completely esoteric. A mention of the Solomonic archives that became incomprehensible, and only the beginning of Genesis, which is the table of the content of the works that were lost in the burning of Jerusalem. That was the only thing that was preserved. So again, we have ancient Kabbalah as authentic, but actually a lost tradition. Okay, so that is what we have in the more theoretical early writings. What about the large amount of what I call them, for lack of a better term, the visionary writing of the Theons? There's only one reference to the term Kabbalah in the text, the visions of the royal neophyte, was published in the Revue Cosmique in French, and we have thanks to Eva, the original English. There we have in the text, and the master says, then after he sees the crystals, then he says, then the Kabbalah of the far past, almost lost in oblivion, is not a beautiful imagination, a rare vision of the night which vanishes on our awakening. The wisdom of the past is not a glorious myth, but as real as the solid trunk of the palm tree on which I put my hand is real. So again, what we have here, Kabbalah is real, authentic, true knowledge of the far past, but again, almost lost in oblivion. But here it can be encountered, but not through text, but through a vision. Another text that may refer to Kabbalah, so I'm already adding references that are, well, but I think it's probably could be, at least it's definitely related to Kabbalah. In the answer to questions published in the Revue Cosmique, they speak about the text of the Tradition Cosmique, which is borrowed mostly from the oral Chaldean tradition. And here there's assumption of scholars and others that this is a reference to Kabbalah. And this is possible because the idea of Kabbalah as Chaldean knowledge was prevalent in Western esoteric circles. Yet we should still notice there is not a reference to Jewish Kabbalah here, but rather to this oral Chaldean tradition that may be identified here with the original lost tradition. Okay, anything, comment on this text before I continue? And I just see.
In the question, in the cosmic philosophy, in the cosmic life, there is one short article. What is Kabbalah?
Isn't the Barlet question? Okay, so that's not a Theonic writing. Yes, I think maybe I refer to them this. Okay, I'll check with you later if that's something that I missed.
I think that Pascal mentioned that when they speak about the Chaldeans, they mean Avraham.
Okay, yes, and that's definitely the reference in that's the story about the Chaldean tradition related to Abraham as at least a channel of the ancient
in the
tradition.
little article, he speaks about the universality of the Kabbalah. Kabbalah is the man from the.
Yes. So that's again the same notion. Early universal Kabbalah, which is lost.
It's a short article about this.
Okay, so I'll take the reference. Okay, apart from the term, so until now it's just that I was looking only on the term Kabbalah and its appearance. But there's also a few mention of explicit Kabbalistic concepts in the Theonic writing. One of them is in a text that was mentioned already yesterday, the dialogue on the Bereshit, which was published by Argaman in Visions of the Eternal Presence. This fascinating text is presented as a dialogue between Moshe and Shor,
Probably Paro.
which is probably, not probably, it's surely Paro. You can, from the context, this is Paro, definitely Paro, and that's another interesting thing to think about, but not related, why, this calling Paro Shor. There is a discussion here of the 10 essence. Now, if you see the text, that said that the 10 texts are patriotism is the crown of the kingdom, wisdom is the foundation, intelligence is the splendor of light, mercy is victory, strength is beauty. These are the 10 essences. The term Sefirot is not mentioned, but I think everybody reads the text will immediately see here. Patriotism who Keter Malchut, Chokhmah is Yesod, Bina is Hod, Chesed is Netzach, and Gvura is Tiferet. Okay, so that's the parallel. So this is clearly the 10 Sefirot, but as I said, the Hebrew names are not mentioned. Only later there's one Sephirah that is mentioned, the Hebrew name Bina. Now, what we have in this passage, and I don't have time to read it, but it's an interesting original adaptation of the Sefirot, the notion of the Sefirot, integrated with terms and ideas of the cosmic movement. And that can be, of course, seen in this identification of patriotism with crown, Keter Malchut. Also, the notion that later comes about is the notion, and I brought the text, of the keves. Keves, again, written in Latin, but this is, of course, the lamb, a very important term in the cosmic philosophy. And there's also interesting, a Christological reference here to Isaiah 53, for the transgression of his people was he smitten, mipesha ami nagadamo, as related to the keves. And this is integrated, this idea is integrated here with the notions of the 10 Sefirot. Later, we have another mention again of the 10 manifestation, I mentioned that the initiates must close their mouths and even their brains before the uninitiated when they discuss it. So, if there are initiates here, maybe better close your brains. According to the recommendation of the text. Now, this is the most explicit Kabbalistic text I found in the Theonic writing. It is very interesting, as I said, but it is based on a very basic, well-known Kabbalistic ideas, basically the idea of the Sefirot. There's a few other explicit references in the Chronicles of Chi, another interesting discussion of the Nefesh, Neshama, Bina, and Ruach. Yes, you see it in the passage, and then there's this discussion. These are words in Hebrew. Actually, they're not necessarily Kabbalistic, but I think here in this context we see they are very important. This is the division of the 3 parts of the souls according to Kabbalah. Also, actually, according to medieval Jewish philosophy. But there's an interesting combination here with the 3 parts of the soul and Bina, okay, which is not a part of the soul. And actually, in this text, they are not portrayed as parts of the soul. They are more of a personas. So again, we see here use of Jewish Kabbalistic terms, but in a different original cosmic adaptation of the terms. Another mention that we have here in the Chronicles of Chi, interesting, and that is actually one term, and this is Tiferes, the first emanated, yes, which is a very central figure, maybe the most central figure in the Chronicles of Chi. There's also a very interesting text attributed to Tiferes, And this is the Canticle of Canticles, Shir HaShirim of Tiferes. Yes, and this here you can see, the Canticle of Canticles of Tiferes, which is sung concerning man and the glorious body under the symbolism of Chatan and Kala. Okay, and these are the Hebrew words for bridegroom and bride by reason of their affinity. So again, this is very interesting, especially that we know that Tiferet in Kabbalistic literature is related, is a very important text, and is related to Tiferet. But again, this is not what we have in the text, because in the Zohar, for instance, and other Kabbalistic texts, Tiferet is the Chatan. Yes, and here definitely there's no identification between Tiferet and the Chatan. Maybe the most interesting thing to note, and here, well, let's see if Jonathan will argue about it, is Tiferet. Tiferet is an Ashkenazi pronunciation of the term Tiferet. Yes, this time you agree. So I'm omitting, I said similar to Kabbalah, so I'm omitting that. There's another mention. I found possibly more, but there's another mention that clearly shows that behind the person who is writing the text is heard the words in a Yiddish pronunciations and know them, and that is das. Das, dat, which is translated, it's written das, D-A-S, and it's explained that this is science and knowledge, and this is the word that is written, in Hebrew is da'at, but pronounced in Ashkenazi pronunciation, das. Okay, so we have that.
Where is it?
That's also in the, I think later in the Chronicles of Chi. And thanks to you, it is searchable, so it's very easy. Just search for das and you'll find. Okay, these are the only explicit references which I found in the published texts and manuscripts. I'm taking a sip if anyone knows or have any comment on those texts. If anyone familiar with other
Also,
texts, I'll be happy.
It's also related here to Shir HaShirim, or
Yes.
is it?
Yeah, canticles, Shir HaShirim, canticle of canticles, it's Shir HaShirim, yeah, definitely, it's definitely, and you can see, and again, I think this is fascinating, maybe I should have spoken, would be more interesting than looking for Kabbalah, is this biblical reading of the Cosmic movement, this kind of elaboration. I think that was mentioned also, and you know those texts, this is this kind of cosmic homilies, midrash cosmic on the Bible, which is very important.
It's interesting that since Theo himself never wrote a line, apparently, what Mrs. Stern was writing was under the influence of his Hasidic, Ashkenazi pronunciation.
Yes, but it makes sense, in a way. If she heard him speaking about the terms, I guess he
It's
pronounced
very
it.
interesting because
To what
only in some
extent she was
specific
English.
Kabbalistic words, because Chatan and Kala,
must be
it
chosen.
will be Chosen and Kole.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting.
Okay.
That only specific
Yeah,
terms.
definitely.
It's not consistent.
Definitely. Very few. And by the way, I assume both of them knew written, they knew also written Hebrew. I assume that also Mary Ware knew to write Hebrew. It was the alphabet and probably some words she knew. From
No,
her
we saw
education.
the
but
manuscript,
definitely, you're right,
Hebrew
it's very
letter.
few words. There's a lot of use of Hebrew which refers to for the writing of the written Hebrew. By the way, it's quite important because there's also the writing of the Hebrew is like the Moshe you saw and the show how it's so there's indication of they don't incorporate the vowels as letters in the writing. If that makes sense. Yeah. Okay, so I would like to go on. Before turning to the possible indirect references to Kabbalah, fine, there's a few other sources who may shed further light on Kabbalah and the cosmic philosophy. There's a few, and these are sources that are mentioned, but I couldn't find the original text or the dating, which I think is very important for that. Pascal Temanlis mentioned a few sources, and again, if anyone have the information or photocopies of the original documents, that would be very important. In his 1955 booklet, Max Theon et la philosophie cosmique, he says that the master said that although usually the age for initiation is 40, his initiation occurred when he was exceptionally young. Now, he doesn't mention Kabbalah, but Pascal and the later sources assume that the mention of 40 years here refers to Kabbalah. And this is takes, some people think this is sure, that takes and take it as evidence to Theon's initiation into Kabbalistic or Hasidic circles. Now, probably this is a reference to the famous folk notion that Kabbalah should not be studied before the age of 40. But I think it should be taken with caution. First of all, as we know, many Kabbalists studied Kabbalah before they were 40, and while initiation is a central notion in Western esotericism, it does not really exist in Kabbalah and Hasidism. Yes, there's no ceremony of initiation. Actually, there's no Hebrew word for initiation. It's quite a problem when I'm writing.
Smicha.
Yeah, but okay, so there's no, yeah, and it's not, it doesn't work well. I tried, if I write about initiation and say asmacha, smicha, it doesn't.
Because of the modern
I
association.
translated to כניסה בסודות.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, this is few possible, but it's not as available in Hebrew as it is in Western
Yeah, it's not
esotericism.
the same.
Okay, another mention, interesting mentions in the way of meditation in the light of Kabbalah, again published by Pascal Timalis in Argaman. There is, in a few other places, there are a few different versions. So again, it's important for me to find the original 3 sayings attributed to Theon, which relate to the Zohar, which is interesting because the Zohar is not mentioned in the texts themselves. One, the Zohar is philosophy and not Kabbalah. The Kabbalah is always transmitted orally. Okay, this is consistent with the perception of Kabbalah as an oral lost tradition, but again, I don't have the original. The second, which is also interesting, seems to be taken from a letter of Theon to Louis Temanis, but we don't have that in the letters that we have, relates to the publication of the Zohar in French. So I assume this relates to the Zohar was translated by de Pauli and began to be published in 1906, and the volumes were published until 1912. According to this text, according to Pascal, Theon says that while the words of the Zohar can be translated, its real meaning cannot. Okay, because the original Aramaic cannot be translated. Very interesting, would love to see the original. Again, consistent, I think, with the ideas that we see that basically this is an untransmittable tradition. The third, maybe the most intriguing, is that Theon said, the Zohar is the only pack I carried on the world's highway. I need to see the original because, and the date of that, because it, that's the only reference we have that Theon might have, that the Zohar was important to Theon. Okay, in all the writing, and again, if there's an original, I would like to see. Okay, there's a few other. That's what I have. The explicit traditions by Pascal that I don't have the original, and a few other references that may contribute to understanding of Kabbalah. First of all, the one I started with by Jacques Brieux. Now I don't know if that is his impression. Or that he heard it from people that were close, because again, this is not
person. This Jacques.
I don't know. I didn't find.
Or a pseudonym.
I don't know.
Could it have been Theo himself writing about himself, as they used to do in those days?
This is in the
You
letters.
think so? That's not.
This is from the letters of Theon to Louis Tamalis. This one?
No,
Sorry.
the one before, but I don't have the original, as I said. Those 3 seem to be taken from letters, but I didn't see the letters. Okay, so
We have the typed sentences from the letters.
But do we have the letters? Photocopies of the letters? But as I said, the first 2 ones are consistent. The third one is very interesting because I didn't see any. And again, it would be very interesting for me to see the dating when he says that.
Mm-hmm. Actually, it's a sentence that you can find in the writings of Rabbi Chas Mikoritz, the Hasidic master. And I believe that Pascal Timalis used a Hasidic, well-known geography tell.
And applied it in the, yeah, and it appears also in a few different versions in Pascal, so again, it's very important to find the original. Okay, so this...
Excuse me, how do you actually spell Brieu? B-R...
B-R-I-E-U.
E-U, no X at the end.
No, I think so. We'll, Christian, you know,
Never heard.
Jacques, who was the one person who...
Not sure.
Yeah, also I Googled, you know, I started looking, I saw nothing, and I didn't think
No.
that was
You would have
other
Googled-
things that I'm chasing. That
You
I'm
would have
not
Googled
okay.
it, yeah. You
As
would
Pat
have
will
Googled it.
say, I believed it to my infinite spare time
Yeah.
in a later. in a later. Okay, so this is the source, and again, it's interesting. It's quite consistent with the perception again of original Kabbalah, oral authentic tradition, lost to the Western world and restored by Theon. Another source is Mira Alfasa. I assume many of you know this. She said in her memoirs of Theon, again, we have to take into account, it's a long time after she met him, but I think it makes sense. She says that he said, that Theon said, that he said that both Kabbalah, he's speaking about the tradition, which is the origin of Kabbalah, and he said that both the Kabbalah and the Vedas were originated from it. And this is the cosmic tradition. So again, we have a tradition which is, Kabbalah is a later or one of the channels of the original tradition. These, I think, are all the explicit, unequivocal reference to Kabbalah which I was able to find in the Theonic writing, all that refer to Theon's perception of Kabbalah. And as you can see, there are not so many of them. Yes, and I think that as Peter Hiss suggested, this is consistent. The fact that we don't find Kabbalah is consistent with the founder's claim that the cosmic tradition predated Kabbalah and other esoteric religious traditions, and that the written sources of Kabbalah were either lost or distorted. Now, if there is so little explicit use of Kabbalah, why is the impression of both followers and scholars and the general people who open and look at the text that the cosmic philosophy is based on Kabbalah? And the answer, I think, is that there are also general points of similarity between the things that look similar if you read the text. Now, several, again, Pascal and followers and scholars noted several parallels between Kabbalah and the cosmic ideas, and they assume that they may originate direct or indirectly in Kabbalah. Some of them, I think the most important, were discussed by Peter Hiss. That's the restitution and divine male and female duality, the body of light. There are some more, actually the grades of emanation, of course, that you see the charts, it can remind you of Kabbalah. The idea of cosmic cycles also that appears and is also a Kabbalistic law. But again, I'm citing or basing myself on his observation, and I agree. There's no indication that these themes were borrowed directly from Jewish Kabbalistic sources. Peter suggests, and I agree, possibly they originated this, by the way, I didn't show you, so yeah, this is one of the charts, for instance, that is familiar to many of you. I think it's reasonable that what we have here is influence, response, and original developments of ideas that were current in esoteric circles in the time, and that we know for certain that both Theon and Theona were connected, affiliated, and knew this text, so they were inspired, developed by this text, but basically these are texts that they come from the esoteric milieu that they were part of. There's another other factors that I think contribute to the impression of the Kabbalistic nature of the cosmic philosophy, and that's the importance given by Theons to Genesis, of course, but again, of course, Genesis is very important to Kabbalah and very important to the cosmic movement. And what I mentioned before, the elaborate rendering and interpretation of biblical verses, which include also use of Hebrew words and letters, as well as also some Hebrew sounding words and use of gematria, another thing we mentioned yesterday. Now, all these elements, well, this is I could have brought better, but the text we spoke about, we can see this kind of use and elaboration of what I said, this cosmic midrash, cosmic homily on biblical verses is very interesting. And again, as I said, and I say it again, I think there's more work to be done here in the question of the cosmic hermeneutics of biblical sources. I think it's one of the fascinating and interesting aspects of the group and original aspects of the group, because I don't know that from other esoteric groups, this kind of really midrash style explanation of biblical verses.
Can I ask a question there? Could you explain what specifically is midrashic style about it? Because obviously, you know, interpretations of Genesis are everywhere in occultist literature.
Yes, yes.
So what specifically?
I would say the reference to the harking back to the use of Hebrew in it, which again you can find some. Gematria, which is used quite a lot. And I would say little bit cases of more types of midrash, of really taking a word without the context and concentrating on it and stuff like that. Yes, but I don't, when I want to say, when I use the term midrash, it's not, again, because I think this is based that necessarily on Jewish midrashim, homilies. There's one of two cases which I suspected, but I can't prove, but a kind of similar approach, of quite a free approach to the biblical verses.
Okay.
So no more than that.
That's what I was getting at. Not everyone necessarily know what that means.
Yes. Okay, so it's not exactly midrash. It's not Bereshit Rabbah.
Right.
It's a different type. That's why I said it's a cosmic midrash.
That
And possibly, by the way, there are other, or Western esoteric similarities. That's something that should be looked at. Maybe I'm not familiar with similar, but it's very central. So, I didn't encounter in the esoteric Kabbalah that I read or biblical verses. I didn't encounter so much. Actually, there's a whole, a large amount of the text. We see this type of explanations.
How about the meditation of Moses? The text.
Yes. Again, that's what I say. We see it reminds one of Kabbalah, but I can't say this is taken from a Kabbalistic source.
No, he's using Moses, right? He's giving these new conceptions, not new conceptions, new interpretations. The interesting thing that I find when you are looking from the point of view of a researcher, you're studying from a point going towards us. The point is, nobody grows up in an empty space. When I look at myself as a child before I even knew anything about Kabbalah, going to yeshiva, so the simple fact that using a word in Hebrew, you didn't even talk about that, nobody talks about it. Using a word in Hebrew for transmission of something. What does it mean Kabbalah in the first place? And then we also understand that there is this aspect of renewal, constant renewal of these traditions.
Yeah. Okay.
And that when I was a boy, so when I was in yeshiva, I didn't even know what Kabbalah was. I never saw Zohar. I didn't know the Baal Shem Tov was some sort of mythical figure. And I learned in the yeshiva common Talmudic known ideas that the Kabbalah, the actual Kabbalah, is not something that started with Moses or with Abraham, that our fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, were studying with Shem and Ever, that they had the real cosmic tradition from Adam, meaning that Adam had passed away the information to his third son, Shet, so forth, Methuselah, just these people, they had the inside Kabbalah because each had many, many sons and daughters. No doubt, everybody, all the children were affected by these people who were named, especially the new phase after the Mabul, the flood that Noah passed.
But you're talking about something else.
I'm not talking about something else.
You are talking about
researching researching this.
Kabbalah is
Okay.
But it is disconnected.
Okay, so maybe in my
So
conclusion
I
I
think
get back, but
because we
don't
don't
have
have a time.
Yeah, but
I want
yeah,
Boaz to finish his
okay,
lecture.
so I
with some
try.
conclusion.
I
notes.
try, but exactly, but that is not what
And
I'm looking for, because as I said, I'm
it's
looking
going
for
to
the
a different
explicit,
way.
and
It's
then,
going-
as I mentioned now, the unexplicit. Now,
Boaz,
very
you have a
quickly.
few minutes, and if you want questions later, so
Okay,
you must.
Okay.
How about the point, Jonathan?
So
why,
just
why not bring up the points that you were just mentioning to me about your doubts about the Kabbalistic origin?
Because it's not
the-
my lecture, it's Boaz's lecture, so I can say something
Okay,
about
so
those.
I'll bring the conclusion. I'll just mention just for what I'm not going to speak about, and that is the writing in Louis Temalise. We see in Ideal Réalité and then in the columns of the temple, later text, we see a bit more use of Kabbalah, explicit Hebrew words, terms, more than what is we see in the Theonic writing, but again, I couldn't find anything there that is taken from a Kabbalistic text that I know, seem more familiar with, although I didn't find the exact source, but it's very general terms that are, again, you can find in the scholarly literature and Western esoteric terms. Only later, in the early 1930s, possibly late 1920s, we know that Pascal begins to study Kabbalah from Jewish sources, and then we see a very different approach, which again speaks, has more familiarity, and speaks from a Jewish perspective on Kabbalah, which explicitly I couldn't find it in the Theonic writings, but I think we'll hear about that more from Jonathan, so I will skip and will just give my conclusion. There is some interest in Kabbalah in the LHB of L and the early cosmic movements, and I mentioned that. There, definitely, they present a Western esoteric perception, and as I said, we wouldn't expect otherwise. You know, they didn't know Hebrew, they didn't have any Jewish background. In the writing of the Theons, there are very few mentions of Kabbalah. Kabbalah is perceived as one of the important channels of the original ancient tradition. It's perceived as an oral esoteric knowledge which was largely lost or distorted, but again can be reconstructed or refound by the Theons through their direct access to the original cosmic tradition, through mystic visions, through Theons' initiation, and through their biblical exegesis. Hence, I think it makes sense that they need not express or manifest much interest in Kabbalah. They had the source of it. Although they were both probably acquainted with some of the prevalent literature of Kabbalah on period in English and French, the writing of Western esotericists and scholars of the Kabbalah mostly, and Theon, who we know was born to a Jewish family in Poland and probably received some Jewish education, may have had some acquaintance with prevalent Kabbalistic terms and ideas. Yet there is no evidence that in the Theonic writing of specific knowledge of any Jewish Kabbalistic or Hasidic sources. In the late 1920s, Pascal Temanlis and his father, probably following him, became interested in Kabbalah and Hasidism and integrated Kabbalistic and Hasidic notions within the notions of the cosmic movements. And since then, Kabbalah became central to many followers of the cosmic movement. That is my conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you.